that we can come out of this infinitely stronger than we ever were before, and that for the first time ever, that we would be a truly sovereign country, where we weren't leaning either on the motherland in Great Britain or on Washington as a crutch for our success, where we define ourselves on the basis of who we were as Canadians, not on the basis of what our relationship was with our neighbor. That's not going to be easy. Throughout probably the lifetimes of all of us in this room, the single most important relationship that Canada is going to have is with the United States, economically, in terms of security, every other way. The brief time when I was foreign minister, I used to joke that Canada has two sets of international relationships. There's the relationship with the United States, and there's the relationship with everybody else. It's that way. If any of your businesses is selling 75% of what you're selling to one customer, you're going to give an awful lot of attention to maintaining that relationship. And I don't think we've given enough attention since the signing of CUSMA to how we manage the relationship with the US. We have a habit in Canada, whenever crisis arrives, you dodge the bullet, then you roll over and go back to sleep. That's wrong. You saw it, Toronto was the epicenter for SARS. This could have been an incredible learning experience for us to how do you prepare for future pandemics. I don't think that we adequately looked at what the lessons were that we learned from SARS before going into COVID. After we signed CUSMA, we assumed, well, it's just business as usual. The government disbanded the cabinet committee that was looking at Canada-US relations, and we pulled back until all of a sudden it became apparent that CUSMA was coming up for renewal and that it wasn't a sure thing. We have in our international relationships, it's a hard truth, unfortunately. Canada has been drifting into irrelevance on the global stage. We're increasingly an asterisk. There was a time when other countries would say, how do we get the Canadians involved? Canadians are solution providers. They act as a bridge between North America and Europe. They are able to go places that the Americans can't go, and have a credibility to be helpful with that. They have suasion with the Americans, and we were seen that way. But we've moved in recent years from people saying, how do you get the Canadians involved, to should we inform the Canadians? When the United States signed the UK, US, Australia Defense Pact, we learned about it when the press release was put out. We weren't even considered as a possible member of that, and we were essentially informed. Our relationship with the world's three biggest economies, the United States, China, and India, is fraught right now. And when you look at our economic performance, we perform very badly compared to our peers and competitors in the G20, for example. We've been slipping further and further back. So there's been a comfortable complacency that we've had that we need to disabuse ourselves of. So where are we? The global trading system was changing dramatically before Trump came along. The Americans had paralyzed the World Trade Organization by refusing to appoint members of the appellate committee that looks at whether or not countries have violated the rules. But in any case, what we were seeing was trade had moved away from being commercial. How do I go to Thailand and sell my product, or where do I source from? How do I build my supply chain? It had gone instead to become increasingly political. So we were seeing sanctions being used and trade being used as a political tool, a political weapon, as opposed to being a value in itself. We want to encourage trade. Secondly, what we saw was the decline of international institutions. Does anybody really look to the United Nations and the Security Council to solve problems of world peace today? Not really. the United States is pulling out of the World Health Organization. How are we going to deal with global pandemics when we see international institutions in the decline? We're seeing on the trade side increasingly regional and plurilateral groups being established, as opposed to attempts being made to bring down barriers to trade universally in the world. So that was already changing dramatically before Trump came along. All of this is being accelerated now. The United States, and they may not even qualify for this, but Donald Trump believes the United States is large enough that he can simply dictate to other countries, whether it's Canada or the EU or even China, what the terms are going to be, and that we'll willingly accept those terms because we have no choice. That's not the case for a large number of the industrialized democracies in the world. Certainly not the case for Canada. Canada needs the rule of law. We need to have regulations that ensure order in the global marketplace and ensure that smaller players are treated fairly. We've been moving from the rule of law to the rule of power and the rule of the jungle in that sense. And Donald Trump's approach is essentially, I will tell you what's good for you and you'll do it. He's discovered that perhaps even the United States isn't strong enough to do that. But for countries like Canada, Japan, the Nordic countries, Australia, New Zealand, the Europeans, the industrialized democracies, what they need is functioning global institutions. What they need is a rule of law that actually governs the relationships between countries and ensures that national boundaries are inviolate and that the rules of commerce and diplomacy apply across the board. It's in that environment, Eric, in my view, that there's an opportunity for Canada. We historically have operated on the international stage as a bringer of solutions. And if we are supple enough and have fresh ideas that are win-win, I think there's a potential for us to assert a global leadership that we haven't seen for many years, and that would be very positive. The other thing, though, is that we have to get our own house in order. We have to go back to basics. We have to focus on the fundamentals. We have to deal with issues like productivity that we've allowed slip so badly in Canada. We have to look at how do we build a 21st century workforce with the skills that make us competitive. We have to look at how do we do a much better job in terms of development of new technologies and actually commercializing those technologies as opposed to simply selling them off. But after a decade where the government has been chasing rainbows, what we have, and I say this as somebody who doesn't belong today to a political party, but whose whole political career was as a progressive conservative, the encouraging thing that I saw when I look at that speech from the throne was a government that was focusing on the fundamentals. How do we get our own house in order, and how do we do it with a sense of urgency that we can't afford to drift? So that's my answer: is the potential is out there. If we have a clear sense of where we want to go, and if we have the courage to see it through. And then one other thing I would add at this point is that the great challenge for us is that at the same time as we've got to look at how we repair the relationship with the United States, we have to look at how we diversify our relationships. Something that we have failed to do over the course. One of the goals of free trade when we brought it in 1988 was to build the domestic capacity in Canada that will enable us from building within the Canada-US relationship to be able to take on the world and to diversify our trade and become true global players. We have not done that. So much of our trade, 75% with the US, and so much of that is intercorporate, General Motors to General Motors, as opposed to genuine trade. And so we've failed up until now. We've got to learn how to genuinely become global traders and to take on the world and win. If we do, Canada can assume a position of leadership in the world, in my view.
I love the optimism of, this is a new start.